in public goods. Imagine that in an era of rising immigration, rising immigration of low-income, low-wage immigrants. More importantly, the wealthy are increasingly able to convince those most likely to be negatively impacted by these policies, the white, native-born, some smaller communities, a certain target demographic, that it is government and its penchant for raising taxes, regulating industries, and supporting unions that is the problem. So transport all of that to migrant-receiving communities, and you're sure to encounter populations that have fallen vulnerable to the same type of risks of job displacement and land concentration that confronted those Latin American migrants that are recruited to work in these receiving communities. Despite all this, however, residents in small, especially in small immigrant-receiving communities, tend to be staunch supporters of neoliberal free market policies and fiscal conservatism ideologies, lacking any alternative narratives about the linkages between development policies and their own deteriorating conditions. These small community residents are eventually the most likely to support anti-immigrant policies and view immigrants as the real threat of their disappearing American dream. It is terribly important, in my view, even if I haven't successfully yet convinced you of all of this, that we find ways to foreground, as complicated as it may be, these connections between global economic policies and the mutual vulnerability that migrants and non-migrants confront today, especially those from lower and middle income. This is not easy, and the public has little patience for complicated analysis in this era of tweeting and what else? Tweeting and Facebook. Thank you. Try talking to a reporter today about it, and you will see their eyes glaze, and your comments never make it into the final story, only to come back and say, my editor took it out. I don't have time to elaborate, but I would like to argue that in foregrounding a more thorough and thoughtful and reflexive critique of development policies as root causes of the discontent, that narrative of migration that has been one of the most serious omissions in our current era, and under the power of this hegemony of market-only economics. In doing that, in foregrounding that, we may allow for alternative forms of more sustainable development to be imagined again by more and more people, especially those who are most affected by current economic policies. Importantly, we may contribute to alternative constructions of immigrants as not simply unskilled workers, but as owners of rich funds of agricultural and community building knowledges and practices that can further contribute to more sustainable development and social cohesion. So this takes me to the second and final point, which speaks to the why Latino immigrants and their children should also be viewed as active social agents and political actors. A view that sometimes also is opaque or totally hidden as we engage in sort of stereotypical notions of Latinos and immigrants as being poor people from the South with little to offer. So I'll do this primarily with the help of pictures, and I hope that way you wake up and we can talk. But let me just first say that not unlike what's happening in other places and nationally, the 2010 revealed what those of us who work on the ground and in academia already knew, which is that Latino population growth was higher than they have been telling us for quite a while, and it surprised a lot of people. And that in itself, it tells you about how we render invisible the realities of Latinos that are left of us. Some of us are going, what? Well, of course, didn't you know? Did you see how many people showed up to that march? And I said, yeah, of course, yeah. So we continue to be surprised. Nebraska, well, nationally, the Latino population grew by 43% in the last decade. Nebraska Latino population grew by 77% in the last decade, and accounted for 2/3 of the growth of Nebraska, of the population growth of Nebraska. In some counties and state districts, the Latino population is near majority and will become an increasingly formidable force in the 2012 and future elections. And in fact, we just published, I should tell you to go to our website to look at many of the many reports that we have published. And the very last one was to look at the Latino vote and its impact in the future of Nebraska, using 2010 and really 2009 community data, American Community Survey data in 2010, and it's fascinating to see. And it actually, we sent it to every senator in the state. And the first one to respond after receiving it, you should like to hear this, was Senator Jansen, the senator who both introduced the anti-immigrant ordinance in Fremont, Nebraska, and the Arizona type legislation in our unicameral. And so he had very complimentary things to say. So it was easy to read. Yeah.
Mostly short words.
Words that he understood. No, that's not nice. I mean, he actually was very nice. But I couldn't help it. That was his coming. Very informative and easy to read. I said, okay, keep that in mind for the next one. But that also tells you how important, again, the work that we do here is. They're paying attention, and the more we foreground the immigrant stories and their power and their force, the more they will have to pay attention. So let me just finish with some pictures that, again, here is just a graphic that suggests what I already said earlier, that lower skill jobs are the main, is where the largest demand for immigrant workers is, in places like Nebraska and in many other places in the state. So the green at the end is Latino foreign born, and then the red next to it is foreign born as a whole. And you can see the opposite ends of that occupational hierarchy, and of course, again, production and transportation, but also construction and so forth, is where many of these immigrants are concentrated. So they are low wage, they are low skill, but guess what? They also produce, I don't know if you can see that, enormous amount of wealth and jobs for Nebraska. And this was a project, a report called the Nebraska Immigrants Economic and Fiscal Impact, which is also on our website, and I was just commenting to my colleagues that it was based on 2006 data, and we're hoping to update it now in the 2010 and the 2011 American Community Survey data. And you can see again, basically, and this is broken by regions, it's not the totality, but basically every one of these regions, including where some of these anti-immigrant fervor is highest, has benefited mightily from Latino labor. Latinos, as I said earlier, however, are not just labor. They're active citizens and they're more engaged, and I see that you had a picture. We were part of that same campaign, We Are America. This was 2006. And of course, if I show you the picture of the marches in downtown Omaha, it was amazing. It was almost 15,000 people marched downtown Omaha, the highest number ever that anybody marched in Omaha, even during the height of the civil rights era. This is, you probably cannot see it very well, but this was the hearing about this Fremont ordinance, which is very similar to the Salvador and Guatemala and Mexico and everywhere else. It was absolutely packed. And we have learned since then how important it is to show up to these hearings. This, you cannot see this one, but Senator Schimmick, whom again my Nebraska colleagues know well, was the author of the Nebraska Dream Act. She had to introduce it 4 times before it passed. But one of the things that we have learned throughout this process, and that we have tried to teach others as we learn, is how important it is to become actively engaged, even if it means simply filling a hearing room. So as you would testify, we have learned in a sort of a cat and mouse game how to get to the Capitol earlier than the anti-immigrant forces and the Minutemen and take all the seats, which has made them very angry. But interestingly enough, so okay, so let me tell you the good side of all this later, because many good things have come out of this. This is actually my class. These are the high school. Well, this is the high school side of my service learning class that I was telling you about. And one of their projects is about, they're not done, one of their projects is about civic engagement. So they went to the Capitol to that hearing. And here is a new organization, an umbrella organization of Latinos, meeting with Senator Har, who, so you see all this engagement with power, learning how to engage with power. And Senator Har was one of the people who, oh thank you Jen, who was most eloquent and devastating in his critique to Senator Jansen of his very poorly written bill. So low skill and active citizen migrants are definitely wanted. This is Tyson. But not just as workers, but as social agencies that resist confinement to those factory walls of the Tysons and the Hormels. And are really finding public space, which is another way of subverting processes of marginalization. That was just an example. Just to give you the final good news, so I've tried to reconnect all these things and trying to go again from the very global to the very local, and trying to convey how fluid these processes are and how important engagement is to lead to further engagement. And the Nebraska legislature introduced at least 6 I think it was about 6 anti-immigrant, when you count even the little sort of hidden languages in others. And we have a chart on our website. In this current legislative period, that afternoon that they debated, that they heard LB 48 in the judicial, is that what it's called? Judicial, sometimes when I translate it to Spanish and I forget which is which. The judicial committee, they heard like 3 others. Well, the good news is none of these bills advanced. None of them. None of them. That was not simply because Senator Har did a good job. That is because the incredible work that goes on the ground, both among emerging immigrant-led organizations and in alliances with others. We had a judge, a former judge, testified against LG 48. I mean, so at the beginning, the testimonies were primarily from teachers and maybe from 10th grade. Now we have the huge array of Latino organizations and so forth. That has done an incredible, that has had an incredible impact. And the Fremont bill that was in that year,